All right, let's find the equation of the exponential function that passes through these 2 points, 0, 5, and 3, 320. So we're going to start by making a table. We've been doing this a lot lately with these functions. Remember, exponential is going to be y equals ab to the x. That's going to be our goal of what the equation will look like. So in our table, let's fill in, let's start at 0, and we have a point at 0, so we can fill that in our table. Our x is 0, y is 5, and then let's leave a few spaces in our table, 1, 2, 3, 4, and fill in the other value that we know. Well, the other point is 320, so we'll put the 320 across from x is worth 3. All right, so we just plugged in the points in our table. What we're going to do now to figure out the multiplier, because we actually already know the starting value for this problem. The starting value is going to be 5, but let's assume we don't realize that first, because we also need to find the multiplier no matter what. So what we're always going to do is start with the lower number in the table, the number that has a bigger x value. We're going to start with that number. If you remember, like the rebound ratio things, we started with the drop height and then the rebound height. So we're going to start with 320 divided by the other y value that we have, divided by 5, okay? 320 divided by 5 will give me 64. So this equals 64, right? So we just started with the one lower on the table divided by the one higher on the table. Because right now there's a gap when we can't, unless we just guess numbers, we can't figure out what the multiplier is quickly. So we divided those things, we get 64. But what's really happening is there's, let's see, 1, 2, 3 spots in the table that we are kind of skipping over. 3 differences, 3 leaps here that we're skipping over. And those have to add or multiply up to be worth 64. So what we're doing is we're multiplying something 3 times by itself over again to make 64. So let's call that value b. So we're going to multiply b by b times b ends up being worth that difference to get from 5 to 320, which would be multiplying by 64. This whole big difference would be multiplying by 64. So we want to find what are the little differences to get from one point to the next. That would be our multiplier. So instead of writing this as b times b times b, we can write it as b cubed equals 64. And how can I get the b by itself instead of being b to the 3rd power? Well, to undo a cube exponent, I can cube root it. And if I do that to one side, I have to cube root the other side. So we get b equals, or my multiplier will be, cube root of 64 is going to be 4. So that means each of these little bounces that's happening is multiplying by 4 each time. And if I multiply by 4 times itself 3 times, that's why I get the 64. So we have our multiplier, and we actually have the starting value, which is when y is worth 5. Okay, so putting those together, y equals, we're always going to start with our starting value first, so we have 5. And then in parentheses, we'll have our multiplier we found was 4 raised to the x. So here's our equation that works for both of these points.